Some of the most difficult water challenges are in settings where there are multiple jurisdictions that are sharing the same water supply. Now, this might mean places where multiple states share the same river. The Colorado River Basin that flows through the American West is a great example of this, shared by 7 states. But there are many, many river basins around the world where multiple countries actually share the same water supply, the same river. Sometimes even underground aquifers are spread across, reach across multiple states, boundaries, or multiple countries even. And so the challenges of trying to come up with agreements about how to equitably and fairly share that water between different jurisdictions is really, really difficult. Now, historically, problems arose, particularly in river systems, because the upstream state or the upstream country used as much water as they could, even to the point of maybe completely drying up the river and preventing it from flowing downstream across the state line or across the international boundary. This is very much the case, for example, with the United States, and that we use so much of the Colorado River's water before it crosses the boundary into Mexico, and Mexico raises its hand and says, hey, what about us? You know, we're rightfully entitled to use some of the portion of that Colorado River as well. The same is true about the Rio Grande River that is shared between the United States and Mexico. But again, it's true about rivers around the world that are shared by multiple countries. And so over time, what we're seeing is these political jurisdictions trying to work this out and trying to come up with agreements. I think one of the best illustrations of this and the difficulties of this is what went on in the Colorado River in the American West. So as more and more population was moving into the American West, as more and more farms were being developed and requiring irrigation from the Colorado River, some of the leading civic minds of the time started to realize that this wasn't a resource that was going to be limitless, that was going to be boundless in its available water supply. Some of the lower states in the Colorado River Basin, like Arizona and California and Nevada, started to think, you know, as those states in the upper basin, as Colorado and Wyoming and Utah start to utilize more and more of the water supply in the upper part of this river system, we could be vulnerable downstream. It might be smart for us to all get together and try to work out a water sharing agreement. And they did that back in 1922. Representatives from each of the 7 states that share the Colorado River got together in northern New Mexico, outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico, in a place called Bishop's Lodge, and they tried to work it out. And they worked it out over the course of days and weeks, and they came up with what was called the Colorado River Compact, also called the Law of the River. And that compact divided up the water supply in the Colorado River system. Now, some of the states got a bigger chunk of that water pie than others. Some states like California were more populated and growing faster and had more political clout, and so they came in and they got a bigger chunk than, say, Nevada, which was relatively undeveloped at that time. But one of the most important tenets that the architects of the Colorado River Compact came up with was they recognized a split between what they called the upper basin states and the lower basin states. And the dividing line was a place called Lee's Ferry, which is now the location of Lake Powell on the Colorado River. And so the states that were upstream of Lake Powell were called the upper basin states, and the states downstream of Lake Powell, which is dammed by Glen Canyon Dam, they were called the lower basin states. And the architects of the compact figured that, based on the measurements of the river at that time, that there was about 16.5 million acre-feet of water available on average in the overall Colorado River system. Now, an acre-feet, for those of you that aren't familiar with that term, it's a volume of water used in water supply allocation in the United States. And it's the volume of water that it would take to cover 1 acre of land to 1 foot of depth. That's an acre-foot of water. And so when they were dividing up the water of the Colorado River, they thought there was 16.5 million acre-feet of water to divvy up. So the architects said the upper basin states are going to get close to half of that. They're going to get 7.5 million acre-feet. We're going to give 7.5 million acre-feet to the lower basin states. And we're going to leave 1.5 million because there's some other things we're going to have to address, like, for example, Mexico at the downstream end of the system. Even though Mexico wasn't a part of that compact negotiation, the architects of the compact knew that they were going to have to share some of the water with Mexico. So there was 1.5 million acre-feet that was left in reserve. Well, tragically, as we've now come to understand, the measurements of the available water available at that time grossly overestimated how much water was available in the Colorado River system. In fact, those measurements we now understand that those measurements were taken from a time period that we now know to be among the wettest 20-year period in the last 500 years. And so now we've had to deal with the problem that we grossly overallocated the water in the Colorado River system. We gave too much rights to that water away, given what we now know to be available on average. And in fact, in some years, when we have droughts, like the current drought that we're in the American West, there's much less than that amount of water available. And so this is creating all kinds of problems in the Colorado River system. Each of the states is getting to the point where they're fully consuming the water that they were entitled to. And in fact, they were using more than the available water supply presently during the drought. So that comes to roost. The best indication of the fact that we're using more water than is naturally available is when you look at the levels of the reservoirs in Lake Powell, dammed by Glen Canyon Dam, and downstream in Lake Mead, which is dammed by Hoover Dam. When you look at the water levels over the last 10 years in those two reservoirs, you see a frightening decline in those water levels. The water levels are dropping year by year by year. And so in essence, what that tells us is the water being used by the 7 states that share the Colorado River are using more water, and they are overusing the amount of water available because their bank account, the reservoir water stored in those 2 lakes, is going down. It's like watching your savings account going down year after year. This is going to have some very serious consequences, and already is starting to have some consequences. As the water level, particularly in Lake Mead, gets down to a certain level, then certain states start to have their allocation of the Colorado River cut back. Arizona is the first to be cut back. Their allocation of their rights to the Colorado River is going to be dialed back. That's going to have some very challenging consequences, particularly if the drought lasts for a much longer time and they have to deal with those cutbacks for years or decades into the future. Nevada would be the next state to really feel the pain. But eventually all of these states are going to have to grapple with having, if they have less water supply available than what they've been allocated and what they've become accustomed to using. And so this is a really an interesting case study of how difficult it is to understand how much water is available, how much water can be allocated, how much water might we want to leave available for other purposes like sustaining our natural ecosystems, and what's fair to allocate among the different political jurisdictions, and how do we do that in a way that is going to be reliable and provide us with some certainty even in the drought years. This is proving to be a great challenge in many, many different river basins and in many different shared aquifers all around the world.